Foxhole is a war simulator massive multiplayer game that is constantly going on. Two factions, the Wardens and the Colonials, fight over a massive map. Real players fight for weeks to win a war, and today we are going to talk about one of the best Foxhole wars to ever occur. War 115 in Foxhole was the second bloodiest war, and the fourth longest war in Foxhole history, lasting over 42 days. It had 6,286,478 deaths. Over the course of 42 days, this averaged out to be about 21,000 deaths every hour. This war was a significant and intense conflict that saw both the Colonials and the Wardens fight fiercely over every inch. The war featured numerous large-scale engagements with brutal infantry clashes at the start, massive tank pushes in the middle, and strategic artillery duels near the end. Today I will cover every day of the war and what happened until the very end. At the start of the war, neutral ground was in Fisherman's Row, Deadlands, and Tempest Island. After 24 hours, the Colonials had secured the neutral ground in the Deadlands, and the neutral ground on the islands were split between both the Wardens and the Colonials. On day 2, the Colonials used their early infantry advantage to secure Endless Shore, but on day 3, the Wardens had pushed back into Endless Shore and had taken half of the region. While this was going on, the Colonials had secured almost all of the Deadlands. On the 4th day of the war, a civil war over resources was taking place on the Colonial side, slowing up logistics. During this civil war on the front, the Colonials had pushed the Wardens out of Westgate, and the Wardens had almost secured all of Endless Shore. On day 5 of the war, early light armored vehicles and artillery had been researched and started to pop up onto the battlefield. The Wardens continued their assault on the east side in Endless Shore and had once again gained some ground back into Westgate on the west side of the map. After 6 long days of battling, the Wardens had finally pushed the Colonials out of Endless Shore. With artillery researched, constant shells were raining down on the Colonials and there was nothing they could do to hold their ground. On day 7, the Colonials would not give up Endless Shore without a fight and used their own artillery to push the Wardens back. And the Colonials had also managed to push the Wardens out of Westgate once again. For the last week, the middle of the map remained at a standstill with no major offensive attacks taking place. On the 8th day of the war, the Wardens had coordinated an assault that would take place across the map. Using the newly researched scout tanks and light tanks, Colonials had lost territory in almost every single region. A significant attack that had taken place was in Lockmore. The Wardens had done the impossible and had crossed over from Mercy's Wish into Tomb of the First and had established a base. The Wardens were showing a lot of early war momentum and things were not looking good for the Colonials. On day 9, the Wardens unfortunately were not able to hold on to Tomb of the First for long. Though this battle had been lost for now, the Wardens continued to push farther on the east side into Reaver's Pass. This region was a logistics hex for the Colonials. If the Colonials lost Reaver's Pass, part of their logistics supply line would be lost. After 10 days of war, the victory points had remained the same, with no side having a clear advantage over the other. This was starting to turn into a very long stalemate. The Wardens were slowly moving south into Reaver's Pass, and if they were to take the hex, this would be a severe blow to the Colonials. On the 11th day, the Colonials had mustered a few light tanks of their own and had started to push the Wardens out of Reaver's Pass. But the Colonials were starting to lose territory on the west side in Westgate. The middle of the map had gone back to being stagnant with no major gains or losses. The 12th day brought a massive counterattack from the Wardens to keep the land they had gained in Reaver's Pass. The Wardens had badly wanted this logistics town, but on the 13th day, the Colonials had started to collect a force that they would call the Biomass. A massive surge of Colonials from the 420th had completely pushed the Wardens out of Reaver's Pass. We were now 2 weeks into the war and bigger tanks were starting to come out onto the battlefield more and more. After 14 days, still no victory points had exchanged hands. The Eastern Front remained unstable, shifting back and forth because of its lack of bridges and choke points. This had officially turned into one of the longest stalemates that Foxhole had ever seen. Day 15 saw more of the same territories being lost and won in Westgate, Deadlands, and Endless Shore, each side being more stubborn than the other. On the 16th day of the war, more tanks were starting to flood into the battlefield and 150mm artillery had been researched as well. Fronts were starting to move back and forth a lot more now. Endless Shore was using their biomass to push north through the region. Claustra was the first victory point to fall during the war and it was given to the Colonials. That first victory point was quickly taken back by the Wardens on the 17th day, and the Wardens had smashed the first wave of the biomass on the east side and regained land back into Reaver's Pass. While this was happening, the Wardens were losing crucial ground in the middle of the map in the Deadlands. Another major assault had occurred on day 18 for the Wardens. The Wardens had cut through many Colonial territories with their massive tank force and were able to take most of Westgate, all of King's Cage, and more territory in Reaver's Pass. They were still not awarded any victory points at this time, so technically the war was still at a standstill. A second wave from the Colonial biomass had gathered up on day 19 and had once again pushed the Wardens back out of Reaver's Pass, and even made their way through the south of Endless Shore. Wardens were starting to get their naval force online and were taking a few of the islands to the west to help reinforce the mainland regions. 20 days had now passed during War 115, and the war might have well have just started as no side had a clear path to victory. 500 in-game days had passed now, and on day 21, the Colonial Navy had joined the battle and had pushed the Wardens out of Fisherman's Row. The mainland had continued to pass territories back and forth like a hot potato. On the 22nd day, the Wardens continued to try to hold their gains on the east side. They were even able to push into Allode's Bight, but with their focus still on the east side, the Wardens had finally lost all of Deadlands and Lockmore, two extremely crucial regions in the middle of the map. With Lockmore finally taken by the Colonials had continued their push all the way into Lynn of Mercy. The Wardens were not ready for this kind of assault. Though the battle had shifted in the favor of the Colonials in the middle of the map, we had still seen no shift in victory points after 24 days of war. With the Wardens focusing so much on the east side, they had let the Colonials slip into Callahan's Passage. The Wardens were being stubborn about taking Reaver's Pass and were slowly losing vital territory. On the 25th day, the Colonials had held on to their gains in the middle of the map while the Wardens were slowly starting to lose the east and the west side. During day 26 of the war, the Wardens had attempted to regain some of the land they had lost in the middle, but as day 27 had finished, the Colonials would be here to stay. This was not looking good for the Wardens, who had started this war out so strong. The Wardens tried and tried to push the Colonials out each day to regain some of the land, but would fall short with each battle. On day 29 of the war, Operation Lynn of Mercy would take place. This was one of the last big attacks the Wardens tried to coordinate. They put almost everything they had into trying to retake Lynn of Mercy from the Colonials to stabilize their fronts. But on day 30, burnout would start to set in, as it does most wars for players. Operation Lynn of Mercy for the Wardens would fail and all of King's Cage would be lost. The Wardens tried again to throw everything they had at the Colonials, who now secured bases in their land. The Wardens had even managed one last attack into Reaver's Pass to attempt to change the tide of this war, but once again on day 32 would fall short and lose it all. A third and final wave of colonial biomass would form and completely push the Wardens out of Reaver's Pass, Endless Shore, and into Stilkin's Shelf on day 33. Jade Cove on the west side would also fall this day, destroying a major logistics hub on the Warden side. On the 34th day of the war, the Colonials continued to knock on the front door of the Wardens, threatening almost every major logistics town in the middle of the map. Things slowed down for a day with not much territory exchanging hands. The Wardens had spent their time building up their defenses to hold off the Colonials, and the Colonials were having to haul their supplies further from the backline to reinforce their advances. On day 36, both Lynn of Mercy and Callahan's Passage would belong to the Colonials. The war was coming to an end. Another day had passed where not much territory had been gained or lost. Again, the Wardens were doing all they could to hold on to what they had, and the Colonials were still having to truck up supplies across the map. During the 38th day of the war, with over 900 in-game days that have passed, the Wardens continued to hold on. They would not go down without a fight. The next day, the Wardens held off every attack, but they were unable to push out and gain any land of their own. On day 40, the battle for the last remaining victory point would begin. At this time, the war could be over any minute for the Wardens. A special task force of Colonials snuck behind enemy Warden lines and tried to end the war by taking a base in secret. The Colonials had managed to destroy and take over the victory point in time. Unfortunately for the Colonials, the Wardens were able to send a defense force there quickly to recover the town hall and push the Colonials back out. With most of the regions in control of the Colonials, the Wardens were putting up their last desperate defenses. The final battles were happening in Callum's Cape, the Moors, and Port of Rhyme. For almost 2 days, the war could have ended at any minute if one of these last victory points was taken. The Wardens were not going down that easily at the end of this war. During day 42, we all thought any second now this war would be over. And finally, on day 43, after 1,022 in-game days, and after 6 million plus casualties, the war had finally ended. Port of Rhyme would be the final victory point to fall for the Wardens. They had put up a fight against the colonial force for almost 2 weeks straight. Almost 2/3 of this war had been a stalemate, with neither side willing to give up any territory. GG's to the Colonials on your victory, and to the Wardens for holding out for so long. This was a really good war. As you may have noticed, this video is part of a new series that I want to start working on at the end of every war. I want to make a video that summarizes the war and add some stories that happened throughout the war. I plan on doing the same thing for War 116. If you have any stories or things that you want to share about the war, feel free to join my Discord and put them into the War 116 summary chat. They can be your own stories or someone else's stories. I appreciate any help that I get with the next video. If you have any feedback about this video with things you would like to see more of or less of, please let me know in the comments, so that way I can continue to improve this type of video. I already have some ideas for the next one to help make the stories even better. Thank you all so much for watching and for your support. Make sure to subscribe for more Foxhole content. I'll see you out on the battlefield. Cheers.